Okay, so it's been a while on the AllegRo. We've had a lot going on. A lot has happened with the car. Maybe not as much as I was hoping, but you know, that's how these things tend to go. Optimism. One of the first changes is that after speaking with Johnny, we kind of decided that the kind of ride height I'd set the car up for was a bit higher than what he maybe wanted. So we didn't cover that in the last video, but we'd already discussed it in that Johnny wanted the car a bit lower than I was originally setting it up. So I set it up as like a sleeper. You know, we wanted it to look like an original AllegRo, so the ride height was quite high, but Johnny wanted it a bit lower than that. That meant quite a bit of work because yes, we could just lower the struts or lower the spring. The problem is then we got really reduced shock travel. The only option was actually to raise the strut towers. So that meant kind of cutting out the strut towers that we'd got and raising them up. Right, so that's got the engine back in now, 35 millimeters further back basically. This side, not a problem. Basically what I've done is I've just added a piece of box section on top of the chassis rails. So that is giving us the extra height we need. Essentially, we are lowering the car body. We're not actually raising the engine. Through changing the ride height, we want to keep the engine, again, in the same position, parallel with the wheels. We are just lowering the car body, but that means obviously bringing the engine up and bringing the wheels up together. So yeah, I've put the mounts on top of another piece of box section, so it's like kind of stacked up now. I'll be able to like shape that so it looks a bit nicer. At the back, you don't actually notice because obviously it butts up against the strut towers. But this engine mount will have to be remade. It's not really, that's again not a problem, but this side, the engine's now kind of out of balance because I had to kind of re-drill a hole. We can't move this mount further back. The mounts aren't actually in the same position. This mount is further forward on the actual Honda engine, and this mount on the gearbox is further back. So I had no choice but to just bring the mount forward on the gearbox, but obviously what that's done is it's taken it way out of center. So I'm going to have a bit of a rethink on that, probably make a whole new mount, which is not a problem, but it's just, you know, something to do. Right, so my plan is, this is the chassis mount side, and I've already neatened this one up a little bit, like chopped it down, rounded it off a little bit, tried to make it a bit prettier. I still might drill some holes in this yet as well, like maybe a big hole in the back here and like a few in the side or something. Again, don't want to go mad. I'm not worried if it's got a few extra grams of steel in it. That basically goes in there. Now, of course, we've got some like prototype holes in here as well, you know, from where we trial different engine positions when we were kind of first messing around with it. So that's something that needs to be rectified. I think what I'm going to do this time is actually make it like a C shape. So I'm going to have no bottom in it. It'll kind of just be like this shape, like I guess like a T shape, a T. But I'm going to try and just make it a bit rounder, a bit nicer. Honestly, it's a really hard thing to make prettier because I've got to have the width in here for this part of the engine mount, of course, and the engine will rotate a little bit. So I've got to have the space in here, but then I also don't really have the width between the bolt holes on the gearbox to really do much with. So it's just going to be a case of cutting some stuff up, trying to make it a bit prettier. Like it was always my plan to kind of cut down the side as well and make it a bit more 45'd. You'll see, I'm probably rambling. Right, I cut some more bits up. I know what you're thinking. these look exactly the same. It's because they kind of are, really. But I'm going to do some serious weight saving on this once I've made it. So I'm going to kind of fill it with holes, basically, but in a nice way. I think it'll become obvious when I do it. But yeah, this is going to be the kind of easiest way to get started on it. So I'll get all these pieces cleaned up now and get it tacked together. And then probably drill some holes in it. And then we'll see how we get on. So there we go. It's looking a little bit more attractive than the one we started out with. Obviously it helps that once I've kind of welded it all, I can like nicely round off all the edges. Some holes in it, so the billet VTEC engine mount should show through. I'll just grab that and have a look. Yeah, so that's upside down, that engine mount, but you can get the idea. You'll kind of see it through there a bit more now. It should hopefully be a bit cooler. Obviously these will all get powder coated at some point as well. So yeah, I'll just try it back on the car now, see if it looks a little bit better. So what I'm going to do now is actually drill these through this chassis leg extension. Obviously before, what I did was drilled and tapped them, which was always going to be more or less a temporary thing anyway. What you really want to do, like probably the strongest way of doing this, is going to be to obviously go through with a bolt all the way through, but then inside of this chassis, in this part of this box section, you want to put a piece of tube that's like an anti-crush tube. So what I'll do is I'll drill this out to the M10 size, and then I'll drill a bigger hole which this tube will go into, and I can weld the tube from both ends and it'll finish flush with the box section, and that way when I put my bolt through, it's really solidly, because you can't like crush the box section together, or like if the box section begins to fatigue, the bolt kind of can work loose. It can't do that because you can tighten it up, and of course you're kind of tightening down the length of this CDS tube, so it ain't going to go anywhere. That's a pretty thick tube. But yeah, it's quite a lot of work in that, really, getting it all finished off again. There's still obviously bits to do, but the majority of the work is there now. And then really the next thing that I got on with was starting to work out the radiator and intercooler positioning. Now, because we changed the ride height, I had to change the engine position as well. That means that we actually ended up getting a full-size Civic FN2 radiator in there. We got one from Tegiwa, which is like an aluminium aftermarket one, so it should be, if anything, more efficient than the OE one, as good as the OE one probably is. But yeah, we've got that in there. It's a bit slimmer than an OE one, and that fits in perfectly now between the alternator and the chassis leg, and then top to bottom, it is like right on the bottom of the front panel and right to the top of the front panel. So it fits in perfectly. You can see I've got a really decent gap in front of there now, and actually I've got some space in behind. Of course, the engine at the minute is leaning right, the kind of radiator at the minute is leaning right back. So I want to square that up, because actually that's going to create more space. But I need to make sure that I leave room in front for the intercooler. So we've got an intercooler as well. We've got a small intercooler, which is again all we're going to need for the space we've got. I'll show you that now. So this is the intercooler we've got. Again, it's not huge, doesn't need to be, but it's big enough. And the plan is to get that mounted in front of the radiator. So again, it's not particularly thick, which is good, because that's going to be what makes it, you know, the biggest challenge is getting that thickness of intercooler in there. Yeah, I've now got the kind of task of getting the radiator mounted nice and straight and the intercooler then in front of that, but all as far forward as we can get it. We don't want to leave any space behind that we don't need to, because of course we're still going to get some cooling fans on here yet as well. So first job is going to be making some brackets. I was going to just try and clamp it on a random place, but I thought I may as well try and measure it accurately, I guess. I mean, seems like a logical thing to do. See if the radiator will fit in. Do try and get the other side lined up as well, and then hopefully try the front panel back on, and hopefully it all still fits. Right, so that's the front panel and radiator in. Drop the intercooler in there, and hopefully there's enough room for everything. So the intercooler goes way over this way. So in that position right there, there is enough room to actually get my hand in between that clutch slave cylinder and the radiator, and that is going to be stacks of room. That's going to be all we need really. And of course I've still got the layer of cardboard between the radiator and the intercooler, so as we remove that, that'll gain us a little bit of room. We only really need literally a gap between the radiator and intercooler, just they're not touching each other, so there's not the heat transfer, but also because obviously we don't want them rubbing on each other or anything like that. So realistically now I think it's a case of I will end up clearancing the front panel a little bit more for the intercooler, I think, just because we can. And then it's a case of, yeah, really it's going to be mounting the top of the radiator and kind of figuring out how we're going to do that. Right, so I've got this piece of inch tube along the top now, and I've cut a piece to go here, like that, which will drop down. Then there'll be a piece going across the front. The only problem with kind of doing it this way is it's not particularly attractive. Not that it really matters, and not that you're really going to see it, but if you was to imagine from the top, like if it had a bend, for example, like a bend that was going around that way, it would look a lot nicer from the top. Problem is, I don't have any equipment to bend this kind of tube. I've got a big mandrel bender for making stainless steel exhaust tubes, but nothing to do this. It's probably something I should invest in, but again, for getting the job done right now, I don't have anything. So we're gonna have to like basically just make this up out of welded joints. It's not going to be a problem. It's just it maybe doesn't look as nice as what it would look nice if, you know, if there was a nice round hoop which went all the way around the front. Maybe something that we could change in the future. I don't know. We'll make it and see how it looks. Again, realistically, you're not going to see most of it because like this joint here is all going to be hidden. You know, most of that is not going to be visible because it'll have the wings on. It's only when all the front end's off you'll see a bit of a boxy looking front end. But I've got the two pieces of tube cut for the side here. So what I'm going to do is I'll kind of weld these up on the bench, coat the end of this out, tack that on there both sides, and then I'm more or less kind of like balancing this tube at the minute on top of the intercooler. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably pack it up a little bit, and then that way the brackets will weld underneath the tube for the top of the intercooler, and then on top of the tube for the radiator, and that's probably going to work out about the best. So yeah, I'll cut a couple more bits of tube for in here, get this welded up on the bench, and see what it looks like on the car. And then really the other big change is that we've finally got the wheels we're going to run. So this has been probably the biggest challenge throughout the whole build so far, and that is that the wheels, or the wheels we want to use, Johnny wanted a big brake kit. Big brake kit means 15-inch wheels, but the wheels need to look like original AllegRo wheels. They need to have an oval slot in them, and that's not that difficult to find. But then we also need something that's going to work with the golf knuckle that we've already got. Now, right back at the start of the project, the car already had golf knuckles on it, and I chose to proceed with the golf knuckles in the hope that we'd find some wheels that would fit. There was a set of Peugeot wheels with the car, which are again with the wrong PCD, and we were hoping that we could maybe drill the hub. Turned out there wasn't enough meat on the hub to drill it for that Peugeot PCD. And so really we started to run out of options in terms of what wheels we could get, which would just bolt onto the 4x100 PCD in 15-inch with an oval slot. There's probably loads of people shouting, they know where some wheels are that fit, but, well, Johnny looked, could not find anything. Well, then I learned that actually there is another option for this Mark II or Mark III golf knuckle, and that is to use the Mark III GTI setup, which is 5x100. And that allowed us to find a Passat wheel, which is 15-inch with an oval slot in it. So they aren't, and we can convert this knuckle to the 5x100 hub. It's all bolt-on parts. So we've got a load of the parts that have come from Heritage Volkswagen Centre for not only the front hub change, which we should be able to just change the hub out from our, let me just grab it. So these are all the parts we've got from Heritage Volkswagen Centre, and what we've got in here, that's for the rear, don't need to worry about that for you. Yeah, so what we've got in here is a new hub, which is 5x100, and this is from Mark III Golf, and we're told, this will just press into the bearing that we've already got in our Mark II Golf setup. Now, I really hope some of you aren't sat at home screaming, no, that won't work. We will see, because there's a lot of parts here. We've also got the parts for the rear suspension. So once I've got this set up again on 5x100 setup on the front, I'm then also going to do the same on the rear, and we can get rid of those Polo 14-inch wheels and go to the 5x100 of the Passat and Mark III Golf GTI or G60 or VR6, whatever it is. I'm not a Volkswagen person. So yeah, that's the next thing to do, is we're going to have to reset up the jig to take the 5x100, which means unbolting these, getting rid of all these spacer plates that we use to raise the to lower the body height when we want it to go lower. And I'm just going to take one of these, weld it underneath here and bolt it back on. So get cracking. Right, so what I have got now is the hub attached to this knuckle using just the bearings to kind of hold it in place. Obviously I've got no CV because there obviously seems to be a difference between the Mark II CVs that we've got and the Mark III GTI or VR6, whatever, front hubs. And we've also now got, which again, this has been something that we've been, as I've explained, struggling with for a long time. We've also now got what are hopefully the final set of wheels. So we've got a set of wheels which look like the AllegRo wheels, but are 5x100 and fit onto this hub. So this is the first time the car has actually had a wheel on it. I've put some studs into the hub, and obviously I can throw some nuts on now. You always want to use studs because wheel bolts are just horrendous. They're like a nightmare to get on and off, and you've got to hold the wheel and line them up, and Whereas if you use studs and extended ones like these are, you just kind of throw the wheel onto the studs, and you know, it's lined up right. You just got to put the nuts on. Obviously these threads are still a bit new, so this nut's a little bit tight. Obviously you want to put a bit of copper slip on these, or just a bit of something while you're mocking up. But yeah, so this is the first time now that it's had a wheel on it that's the final wheel we're going to use, because before we was using the 14-inch polo wheels, which we couldn't use because they weren't big enough for the brake kit. And of course we've no idea how this was going to work out offset wise. It's quite difficult to really calculate, but now I know we've got no brake disc bell on here, so the wheel will still space out maybe 5 or 6 mil, but I can instantly see, if I use my ruler, that we have got a really good, I mean, the outside of the wheel edge with a 5 or 6 mil of spacer from the brake disc bell is probably now going to be just proud of the wheel arch, which is really as good as we could, I think, ever have hoped for without anything to actually try on the car. Because like I say, this is the first time it's actually had what we know is to be the correct wheel that will actually fit the car. Now we need to get the tyres fitted and check it again and see what it's like in terms of front wing and wheel arch clearance. And then also check things like steering angle. We can begin to work out how much steering angle we've got, if that's going to work. The more the wheel moves out of the wheel arch, the more steering angle you get. And because obviously we've got quite a wide engine and a really narrow car, and we're trying to give wide track on wider wheels, there has to be a compromise somewhere. And usually when this kind of setup, it's steering angle. If I'd have tried to do a similar thing to this on the Princess, again, I would have ended up with a compromised steering angle. But because I've thrown the wheels so far outboard of the body, I've not ended up with having any of those compromises. The compromise I've got is I've got to have big wheel arches, but I wanted that. Obviously, Johnny doesn't want that. He wants it to look standard-ish. So yeah, I'm going to go get the tyres fitted now and see what it looks like. I've got to push the hub up. Obviously there's no spring on the shock absorber, but I've got to push the knuckle up to get the wheel onto the studs, and the wing is obviously on top of the tyre. She's on. This is looking good. As you can see, the jig holds the wheel at ride height. Basically, that's the idea. So this is kind of what we were always starting with, was knowing that this is going to be like the floor height, basically. And so this then was what we changed the ride height to, was to having the tyre just tucked inside the wheel arch. You can just see that. And honestly, I don't think this could have worked out any better if we'd have tried. I think it looks perfect. Again, obviously the wheel is going to come out another 5-6 mil because we've got the brake disc bell. But what we're also going to end up doing is cambering the wheel in at least a degree and a half. So obviously that then brings the top of the tyre back into the wheel arch again. I think it actually looks weird, because as I look through the camera, it actually looks like it's closer to the wheel arch than closer to the body than it actually is. So yeah, I kind of feel like that's going to be perfect. So again, I can now do the same again on the other side. Not that I really need to, but obviously we do want to get it built up as much as we can. Then we can mount the steering rack, because now we know where the kind of ride height is fixed at. We've got the correct hubs and knuckles on the car, so we can do the we can mount the steering rack now and think about the anti-roll bar. It's getting somewhere. It's now got 2 wheels that fit on the car, which is a major milestone. That took quite a bit figuring out. There's obviously some people that helped out with that, so if you're watching, thank you very much for helping me figure out what parts I need. I don't know anything about Volkswagen stuff, and sometimes these kinds of things can be hard to find out on the internet. Just Googling, you can get a lot of false information. So yeah, it was good to have some, an expert in golf stuff. So yeah, the car now has the correct wheels on it, which means we can kind of get the front end from a suspension point of view to an area where it's done now. Other than anti-roll bar, nothing else is going to change here. The other thing that we've got on the car now, which I've kind of been doing in between other jobs just to break it up a little bit for myself so that I'm not constantly working on the same, sometimes boring things. You know, you do tend to get bored when you're working on these projects from time to time. We started making the turbo manifold. So we've got the turbo now from Owen Developments, which is quite a big turbo really, to suit the power specification that we want. As is traditional with the K-series stuff, it's mounted over the gearbox. We probably could have put it down the back, but I think given that we've got the space at the side, I'd rather use that. It gives us more room for manifold and the exhaust to go down there. So yeah, we kind of made a bracket. We've got a bit of a prototype bracket now, bolted onto the cam cover, which is kind of suspending the turbo where we want it to be. And I started to create the manifold, trying to keep everything as nice and as free flowing as possible from the back of the engine over to the side where the turbo is. Obviously that's quite a time consuming job. If there's anybody that's made turbo manifolds, especially one-off turbo manifolds, they will know it is very time consuming. Luckily I've been able to use the Ice Engine Works kit, which has obviously saved me a lot of time in terms of actually mocking up the primaries, but getting that first run in there, it can be quite time consuming. But we've managed to get quite a bit of room in for a downpipe still. We can get a 3-inch downpipe in there. A nice big air filter on the front. We might make some kind of air box. I don't know yet. That's all kind of open for debate still. But yeah, it's starting to look pretty impressive now with the manifold in there and, the front end of the car built up. We're just really now missing an inlet manifold and then some of the smaller components like a water pump, some boost pipes, radiator hoses, wiring, things like that. So it should now hopefully start to come together. Temporary fixed position, because I say everything's temporary until, probably the car is rolling down the road with an MOT, is the steering rack. So we could have used the original AllegRo steering rack, but we had to chop the hell out the mounts for the engine to get the engine in the position we wanted it to be. And there was a bit of rot behind there. Again, you can never quite get into all the seams when you blast the engine bay. So we thought it was best to take that mount off, go with a new rack, rather than try and get the AllegRo rack reconditioned, whoever can do that, It had already had the track rod's ends chopped. It wasn't in the best condition, so we managed to get a brand new Escort rack from MST cars. Again, they're like a really good brand new steering rack. It's a no-brainer to use something like that. The only challenge is really that it mounts in a similar but different way to the AllegRo. So I've had to again create bespoke mounts, which has been super time consuming. It took me about 2 whole days just to kind of create these rack mounts and get it fixed to the bulkhead in a way that's going to be strong, that's going to actually translate the steering input of the steering wheel into the actual knuckles on the car. Because again, it's no good mounting the steering rack in a way where it can flex. It needs to be fixed and positively mounted. And we've also got these adjusters on the end of the knuckle. So in like competition use, if the AllegRo is to be used in competition, but the Escort competition use track rod ends are a rose joint and they're like on car adjustable. So it does make them a hell of a lot easier to adjust rather than adjusting them in a more traditional way by winding out the track rod end like you would have to do on an Escort. So yeah, that's another big job ticked off, because now we can begin to work on the inside of the car in terms of where the steering column goes, because we want to put an electric steering column on it, probably something like off a Corsa B or a Corsa C, and get that pedal box in, because now we know exactly where the steering rack spline is going to come out. And again, it does come out in quite a different position to the AllegRo. So again, big job ticked off, and it means that we can start lots of other jobs which are hopefully going to get us closer to getting the thing on the ground, on its wheels, and actually drivable.